Yeah, I was the first one from my high school that was a pretty tough high school. It's closed now. And I grew up in Bayswater, which is Far Rockaway, and it was a pretty tough neighborhood. But I liked the guys that came from reform school more than there was sort of two groups, middle-class Jewish guys, and then you had these real tough kids. And I got friendly with them. And so I was, my parents never thought I'd amount to too much. My father and mother, who had the first buck they ever made, not that they ever made much, but they came from the Depression. And they were good people and all, but they never took a trip. My mother worked 6 days a week. You know, she taught Sunday school. My father was an interesting guy. He was sort of an intellectual, and he wanted to be a Metropolitan Opera singer. He was obsessed with his voice, and he never quite made it. So he was frustrated. So he became a cantor in a temple, actually in Cedarhurst, where you lived, in Bethel. But here's the funny part of that story. He was a dogmatic atheist. So here he was a cantor, singing in a temple, and and then Yom Kippur even, he'd go out just because he really didn't like the people in the congregation. He'd go into his car that he hid a couple of blocks away and eat a ham sandwich, literally, during Yom Kippur, and then he'd come back and sing all those things.
You put cheese on it, or no? A little bit of cheese on the ham, or no?
Yeah, you know, I never found out because it's amazing that I'm not institutionalized with the way I grew up. And my mother's very strong personality. So they told me, look, the only way we're going to pay for your tuition is if you get into Yale, Harvard, or Princeton, which they figured they were pretty safe with because nobody ever applied from Far Rockaway. And I got in, well, and I actually got into Princeton and Yale. My mother would boast to her friends, you know, she was a school teacher, look at my son, I got in. But they were really worried about spending the money. And in those days, it was only $750 for tuition and $750 for room and board. So my father said, you know, son, I'm thinking about you, and I'm not going to go back on my word. I'd rather you go to Queens College, you know, because Queens was free, but if you insist on going to Princeton, we decided we'll pay the tuition. I said, great, thanks, Dad, I really appreciate it, but not the room and board. So I said, well, wait a minute, how do I live? How do I eat? He said, you're a smart kid. I've watched you. You'll figure it out. And I went down and talked my way into it. It was hard to get a job as a cabana boy. Along that beach. It was very hard. You had to know somebody. I didn't know anybody, but I talked my way into it. And I got a job in Malibu Beach Club. And in Malibu Beach Club, I didn't know much about it, but, you know, I was a hustler. And I go, and there were a lot of young guys that were doing well then. You know, in those days, you're making 15 grand a year. They were all doing well. They were guys from Brooklyn. And they'd be there, and I was a good guy. I'd get them, if they wanted booze, I'd get them booze, you know. They wanted to meet the girl across the way, I'd go over, let me introduce you. You know, I was a fun kid.
Anthony, Carl, and I both were cabana boys.
We both lived near each other, but you had a better area. You came from slightly
bit better.
But it was a great way. Bathing suit better than you.
Absolutely, but it was. I mean, Carl, that was an amazing way to. When you think, we'll get into investing later, but it was an amazing way to see how, if you thought outside the box, the way you handled those people, I'm sure that there was some connectivity years later in terms of getting outside of what everybody else was doing.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot, but the thing that I really did learn was they'd stay Saturday night and have this poker game. To me, it was a huge game. You could lose $1,000 or $1,500, you know, it was huge. And they liked me, so they'd say, hey, kid, come sit down, lose your tips, play with us. So the first time I played with them, I lost all my money that I made that week because I didn't know how to play. So I read 3 books on poker. You know the books about it. These guys never read a book on it in their lives. And it's all mathematics, it really is. After reading those 3 books, I was 10 times better than them. And they were drinking, and I wasn't, so that made me 30 times
it's
better.
a big lesson to our viewers. You got to read, you know, SATs, prep.
You got to read and look into stuff and research and
big lesson. And
really wait until you hit something. And every week I'd win, I don't know, $400 or $500, $300. At the end of the summer, I had $2 grand, 2,000, and that's when room and board was only $750. And my grandfather upstairs, who lived upstairs, because my parents wanted to save money, so he would pay rent to my father. And he said, look, don't tell him you're making the money. That's what he thought. Don't tell him you're making the money. I'll hide it for you. So I give him the money. After 4 years, I had about 10,000 saved, and I paid my room. And to this day, I'll never know why my father and mother never asked me where I got the money to pay. They never asked me once, where did you get the money for the room and board? They just didn't care, you know, whatever it was.